Answers in Genesis posted an article on Twitter recently entitled, "What is the best argument for the existence of God?" So what is their best argument? Is it convincing? Is it even coherent? Let's crack this egg. AIG? Egg? Yeah, I stole it from Paulogia. Actually, oh, wait a minute. I don't think I need to steal it. Hey, Paulogia.
Hi, Granny.
Hi, Paul. Do you mind if I borrow an egg?
Sure, you can borrow an egg.
Thanks, Paul. I'll give it back at the end of the video. I promise. I'm Godless Granny. Let's have a chat. So AIG is going to give us their best shot at proving some evidence for the existence of God. Let's see what they have. The article starts with a dialogue between a Christian and an atheist. It's not too bad. They do steelman some atheist arguments, but they also strawman others. I'm not going to go through it in detail because even AIG doesn't buy what the Christian is selling. At the end, in bold letters, AIG says, "Not conclusive." They flesh out their position by saying it should be noted that all facts used by the Christian in the above hypothetical conversation are true. Yes, God is the first cause, the designer of life, the resurrected Christ, the author of Scripture, and the Savior of Christians. Yet the way these facts are used is not decisive. That is, none of the above arguments really prove that God exists. Okay. So why did you bother using it? Is your point that Christians make bad arguments for God? You want to show that some arguments are unconvincing, so you're going to teach Christians how to make convincing arguments? Okay, let's see what you have that's more convincing. I'm skipping past the remaining paragraphs where they continue to address the dialogue. Now we get to their first evidence for God. God doesn't believe in atheists. This is evidence for God. You've just presupposed that a God exists. It's your God, and that God has thoughts, and that your God doesn't believe that I exist. Your God exists, but I don't exist. Let's see how you support that. The Bible teaches that atheists are not really atheists. That is, those who profess to be atheists do ultimately believe in God in their heart of hearts. The Bible teaches that everyone knows God because God has revealed himself to all. Romans 1:19. In fact, the Bible tells us that God's existence is so obvious that anyone who suppresses this truth is without excuse. Romans 1:20. The atheist denies with his lips what he knows in his heart. But if they know God, then why do atheists claim that they do not believe in God? First, Romans 1:20 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." We are without excuse because God's invisible qualities are clearly seen. How can you argue that God has revealed himself by making his invisible qualities clearly seen? If they are clearly seen, they are not invisible. If they are invisible, they are not clearly seen. And if they are not clearly seen, they are not revealed. Even if I accept all of your presuppositions, we still have nothing. It's like the little kid that can't prove his point and finally concludes, "You can't see it because it's invisible." You claim that in our hearts we atheists believe in your God. I can tell you that on this point you are absolutely wrong. I was a Christian for 42 years. I prayed the sinner's prayer. I believed I was a sinner in need of salvation. I believed Jesus died for my sins and rose from the dead to save me. I believed that I was going to heaven because God saved me. For a while, I believed that I chose to be saved. I believed that my salvation was as certain as the ground that I walked on. Later, I was convinced that because God is sovereign over everything, including who is saved and who isn't, I shifted my beliefs to Calvinism, that only the elect are saved, that God's salvation is effective to all that He intended to save. I believed that God was the air I breathed and I couldn't live without Him. I attended church twice a week, read my Bible, and prayed daily. I was so sincere in my belief that I got jealous every time I went to a funeral of a believer. I was jealous that they were with the God that I loved and I was not. I've gone into more detail here than I previously have because someone recently accused me of never having been a believer, and I've realized that I glossed over parts of my background that I thought should have been obvious. But I also get that my life doesn't fit the worldview of a believer. According to the Bible, a person shouldn't be able to be a true believer and then stop believing. So they have to try to make my life fit their worldview because the Bible can't be wrong. The only way to do that is to deny that I was ever a believer or to say that I'm on a prodigal journey and will eventually return to the faith. I've been accused of both of these things, and I can assure you, neither is true. Like Steve Brown says, once you see truth, you can't unsee it. But you can think that something is true and then realize you were wrong. I was wrong. I have stopped believing and I didn't die. I can still breathe because God is not the air that I breathed. Rather, I breathed a mix of oxygen and nitrogen that developed in the atmosphere, and I'm just beginning my journey to learn about all the science behind that statement that I denied as a believer. I am so thankful to Paulogia, Viced Rhino, Aaron Ra, Jackson Wheat, Professor Stick, and other YouTubers that are teaching me the science of nature that I tried so hard to ignore as a believer. It's really a lot like believing in Santa Claus. When you discover that Santa isn't real, first you're disappointed because you really liked that guy. And then you go to school and you tell your friends that Santa isn't real, and some of them insist on believing. You even show one of them the presents in her parents' closet and tell her to watch and see that those same presents will be under the tree on Christmas morning, wrapped with tags saying they are from Santa. And then when it happens, your friend still insists that Santa came. Your friend tells you that you won't get any more presents from Santa because you don't believe. Except at your house you do have presents. And then your friend tells you that this is evidence that Santa is real. The biggest flaw in this analogy is that there really is some evidence for the existence of Santa, the presents. It's just that the evidence was faked by the parents trying to perpetuate the myth. Most Christians don't present us with fake evidence of God. There are a few that claim they've found Noah's Ark or the Shroud of Turin or other relics, but most give us nothing. The movie Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus concluded that even though there is no real person that is Santa, that the spirit of Santa lives in your heart if you want it to. God is the same. There is no real God. God is an idea. He can't produce evidence of himself because he only exists in the minds and hearts of those who believe in him, like Santa. I did believe. I thought he was a person. Like Santa, I now realize that God is only an idea, and that's why different people have different ideas of God. Just like Santa looks differently and does different things in different cultures, they are similar ideas that live in myth. Next, AIG says, the answer may be found in Romans 1:18. God is angry at unbelievers for their wickedness, and an all-powerful, all-knowing God who is angry at you is a terrifying prospect. So even though many atheists might claim they are neutral, objective observers, and that their disbelief in God is purely rational, in reality, they are strongly motivated to reject the biblical God who is rightly angry with them. So they suppress that truth in unrighteousness. They convince themselves that they do not believe in God. The atheist is intellectually schizophrenic, believing in God but believing that he does not believe in God. Once again, the Christian worldview and the Bible don't fit the reality of my life. I was saved. I believed God saved me from my sin, so I had no reason to run from an angry God. I lived to hear the words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," which I fully expected to hear shortly after my death. The intellectual schizophrenics, Schizophrenism? Came when I realized that the Bible was wrong. Once I saw that the Bible wasn't the inerrant word of God that I had believed it to be, suddenly the very existence of God came into question. Christianity is a house of cards that stands or falls with the Bible. Even this article that claims to have the best evidence of God has nothing more than the Bible. If you believe the Bible, you will believe in God. If you don't believe the Bible, you might believe in a different God, or in more than one God, or in no God. If you're going to say, I believe in your God because your book says so, then you're going to need evidence to show that your book is true. AIG concludes this section with, therefore, we do not really need to give the atheist any more specific evidence for God's existence. He already knows in his heart of hearts that God exists, but he doesn't want to believe it. Our goal is to expose the atheist's suppressed knowledge of God. With gentleness and respect, we can show the atheist that he already knows about God, but is suppressing what he knows to be true. So their evidence for God is, you know I'm right. Nothing physical, nothing anecdotal, just I'm right and you know it, so I proved it. It sounds like this was written by a 5-year-old. Who wrote this? Dr. Jason Lisle, astrophysicist, author, and speaker. He has a PhD in astrophysics from the University of Colorado. So why is he writing about arguments for God's existence that have nothing to do with astrophysics? I get that people have different interests, but this seems just so far afield of his area of expertise that I'm left wondering why he didn't even attempt to bring his field of study into the argument. The article does have a pretty picture of a Helix Nebula, but there's no reference to the picture in the article. Next he says, because an atheist does believe in God, but does not believe that he believes in God, he is simply a walking bundle of inconsistencies. One type to watch for is a behavioral inconsistency. This is where a person's behavior does not comport with what he claims to believe. For example, consider the atheist university professor who teaches that human beings are simply chemical accidents, the end result of a long and purposeless chain of biological evolution. But then he goes home and kisses his wife and hugs his children as if they were not simply chemical accidents, but valuable, irreplaceable persons deserving of respect and worthy of love. Dr. Lisle, this is because I am more than the sum of my parts. So are all people. All people can be reduced to chemicals, but that doesn't mean that people are just chemicals. You know this. It's true even of man-made complex things, like your car. Your car is made up of metal, plastic, and cloth parts. You can't drive any of the parts, but if you put them together, you have a car that you can drive. It only works when it's assembled. So there's no behavioral inconsistency in me walking into my garage, getting into my car, and driving just because I know the parts, when unassembled, won't go anywhere. That people came about by a natural process doesn't make them any less valuable as people. Your characterization of evolution as simply chemical accidents is inaccurate. I can't imagine that your university professors taught that evolution was just a series of chemical accidents. You are lying to try to make the world fit your worldview, and then saying atheists are inconsistent for not accepting your lies. I'm skipping down a bit, or this video will go on too long. He ends this section with, now, some atheists might respond, that's right. Morality is subjective. We each have the right to create our own moral code, and therefore you cannot impose your personal morality on other people. But of course this statement is self-refuting, because then they say you cannot impose your morality on other people. They are imposing their moral code on other people. When push comes to shove, no one really believes that morality is merely a subjective personal choice. First, atheists don't agree on whether morality is objective or subjective. I personally go for subjective, but there are atheists that I respect that disagree. Asking you not to impose your morals on me does not force you to accept my moral code. I'm only asking you to respect my right to believe that my moral code is better. The morality of my code is not forced on you because you don't have to agree with it. So no, this is not a self-refuting statement. I believe you have it backwards when you say when push comes to shove, no one really believes that morality is merely a subjective personal choice. You claim that the Bible gives you a source of objective morality, but I don't think you really believe everything in the Bible to be objectively true. Take the issue of slavery. The Bible doesn't have a problem with it, yet in almost every society today, the idea of a person owning another person is morally repugnant. Christians try to explain this away by saying slavery was different in the Bible and it wasn't like slavery in the U.S., if so, then why did the slave owners use the Bible to justify having slaves? And if they misunderstood the Bible, why does the Bible make it clear that the slaves were owned by their masters and were inherited like the rest of their property? Women were the property of their husbands. If owning another person is objectively wrong, the Bible not only didn't tell us this, it specifically told us otherwise. So if the morality of owning slaves is objectively morally right, then it should still be so. But it isn't. It is subjectively morally wrong because as social creatures, the moral concept of the wrongness of owning another person has evolved. Because Christians today know that what was believed by the founders of the religion is morally wrong, proves that even your morality is not objective. Now I'm skipping down because this video is getting too long. His greatest proof is this. But laws of logic are not material. You cannot pull a law of logic out of the refrigerator. If atheistic materialism is true, then there can be no laws of logic, since they are immaterial. Thus, logical reasoning would be impossible. No one is denying that atheists are able to reason and use laws of logic. The point is that if atheism were true, the atheist would not be able to reason or use laws of logic because such things would not be meaningful. The fact that the atheist is able to reason demonstrates that he is wrong. By using that which makes no sense given his worldview, the atheist is being horribly inconsistent. He is using God's laws of logic while denying the biblical God that makes such laws possible. No atheist that I am aware of denies that the immaterial exists. Ideas are immaterial. Ideas exist. Atheists don't deny this. That we live in a material world doesn't mean that everything in it is material. You argue for laws of logic, but then you set up the flimsiest straw man I've ever encountered. You also violate the laws of logic in making your argument. You violate the law of non-contradiction and even set up a picture demonstrating. I know you intended it to be the atheist that broke the law, but I'm afraid you actually are the guilty party here. You just argued a few paragraphs back that atheists believe in subjective morality. Subjective morality is immaterial. Now you argue that atheists only believe in material things. Which one is it? Now he finally gets to his so-called proof. How could there be laws at all without a lawgiver? The atheist cannot account for 1. The existence of the laws of logic, 2. Why they are immaterial, 3. Why they are universal, 4. Why they do not change with time, and 5. How human beings can possibly know about them or their properties. Why do you assume there must be a lawgiver for law to exist? You don't know the origin, so you assume it must be God. This is the God of the gaps fallacy. It's ironic that in an argument for God because of the laws of logic, you break the law in trying to set up the argument. The answer to number 1 is the laws of logic exist because they are natural laws. They are part of how nature is. 2, why are the laws of logic immaterial? That's easy. Because they are ideas, and ideas are immaterial. 3, why are they universal? That's easy too, because they are laws. That's the definition of a law. If they were not universal, they would not be laws. 4, why do they not change with time? Same answer. This is part of the definition of a law. If they changed with time, they would not be laws. 5. How can human beings possibly know about them or their properties? Because we study them. I am not well versed in the laws of logic. Stephen Woodward, known as Rationality Rules, is. He would be an excellent candidate to further explain this to you. Now, since none of your 5 premises are true, then no conclusion could possibly follow. But we'll look at your conclusion anyway. But, of course, all of these things make perfect sense on the Christian system. Laws of logic owe their existence to the biblical God, yet they are required to reason rationally to prove things. So the biblical God must exist in order for reasoning to be possible. Therefore, the best proof of God's existence is that without him we couldn't prove anything at all. The existence of the biblical God is the prerequisite for knowledge and rationality. This is called the transcendental argument for God, or TAG for short. It is a devastating and conclusive argument, one that only a few people have even attempted to refute, and none of them successfully. Except that not only do you conclude that a God must have created the laws of logic, you conclude that the God must be the Christian God with nothing to support why you think that that God is the logical choice. You just shoehorn your God in. This is an example of the non sequitur fallacy. Your conclusion doesn't follow from your premise. And again, you've broken the laws of logic in your attempt to prove God by logic. Lyell's concluding section begins, though the transcendental argument for God is deductively sound, not all atheists will be convinced upon hearing it. Yeah, well, we aren't convinced because it isn't deductively sound. Proof is objective, but persuasion is subjective. The transcendental argument does indeed objectively prove that God exists. However, that does not mean that the atheists will necessarily cry uncle. Atheists are strongly motivated to not believe in the biblical God, a God who is rightly angry at them for their treason against him. But the atheist's denial of God is an emotional reaction, not a logical one. We might imagine a disobedient child who is about to be punished by his father. He might cover his eyes with his hands and say of his father, "You do not exist." But that would hardly be rational. Atheists deny with their lips the biblical God, not for logical reasons, but for psychological reasons. First, you commit the fallacy of ableism, also known as the con artist fallacy, by claiming that atheists are unable to refute your position and then that your God is angry with them. Next, you commit the fallacy of speculation by attributing emotional reaction to the atheist as a motive with no evidence to support that assumption. The list of fallacies you commit here is so long, and this video is already too long, so I'll stop at this one and just make one final observation regarding your statement that the atheist's denial of God is an emotional reaction. Most Christians' strongest argument for the evidence of God is personal experience. One can't refute the personal experience of another, and so it tends to be unrefuted. Personal experience arguments usually claim an emotional experience as the basis of why the person now believes in God. So it's ironic that you claim that the atheist denies God because of emotion. It seems that you are projecting here. And at least in my case, it couldn't be further from the truth. I had salvation. God wasn't angry with me. To turn from God would cause emotional problems. Most of my family are still believers, so the emotional tensions created by my unbelief would have been a motivation to belief, not unbelief. But it was the only rational conclusion. Once I saw the failure of the Bible in history, archaeology, anthropology, geology, and even in your field, Dr. Lyle, cosmology, I could no longer believe in the God of the Bible. It's a conclusion of reason, not emotion. In your conclusion, you state, "We must keep in mind that it is not our job to convert people, nor can we." You can't, not just because you can't prove your God, as you claim you can. You don't even have good evidence that he exists. Okay, I'm done. Paul, your egg got a little scrambled. Sorry. You want me to get you another one? It needs something. Maybe some ham. Until next time,
Later.
live your life.